another 80s golden age of comedy, and do I have a show for you. This show that we're going to do today, it brings me back, and it's a little bit scary to say 40 years ago, almost to the day. Because in 1981, I believe, and you guys might guess, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I believe I'm right, was the first year of Evening at the Improv. And I got into Boston, left Boston, drove to LA. My friend put me on the doorstep of the improvisation on Melrose in Hollywood. And he said, you want to be in show business? This is where you're going to stay. This is where you're going to meet everybody. And he introduced me to a fellow named Bruce Smirnoff, who's going to be our special guest in just a couple of minutes.
I'm looking forward to that.
40 years ago. And a few months after I got there, I walked into the Improv, and it was a production studio because they were shooting the first year of Evening at the Improv. And I have with us here today the producer and also the person who was responsible for getting all that talent on stage. So first I'm going to introduce Rupert Macnee. Welcome to the show, Rupert.
It's a pleasure to be here, Bruce. It's been a long, long time. Actually, the pilot was shot in 1980, the previous September in 1980, on about 5 days after I got married in Toronto. So It was an interesting week. But Billy Crystal very kindly hosted that show, and he gave me a real sort of mantra to, he said, Rupert, this is a gymnasium. This is a place where comedians, comics come to see what works and what doesn't. And when I reported this conversation to our distributor, Larry O'Daly, and I said to him, some jokes might not be as funny as other jokes. He said, they're all going to be funny.
Okay. And also, the lady who I've known for years and years, I'm not sure how we first met when you were at the Improv, and you were the person in charge of booking the talent, the head of talent for the show. Mary Downey, welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you, Bruce. And it's so nice to be here today with you and with Rupert. I was trying to remember how I first got connected with the show. And I was working with this other man, Gus Shermer. And I guess together we started the show, but Gus went to another project. And then Rupert was so kind to keep me on board and the opportunity to really meet a lot of comedians. And it was an enormous task, I will say, because we had a lot of people, a lot of hosts, a lot of music acts, just a lot going on. And I remember you at the Improv every night. I remember you there supporting the show. And we had a great time.
Well, one of the first people that I met when I walked into the Improv, probably the very first night, my friend Mitch Ween, who Bruce Smirnoff knows, Mitch said to me, if you want to be in show business, you go into this Improv, and I'm going to tell you to go introduce yourself, find out who Bruce Smirnoff is, find out who Mark Goldstein is, and tell them that I sent you in. And our next guest is the guy who been friendly with, sometimes on and off, but been friendly with since 1981. Bruce Smirnoff, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce.
Hello. Pleasure to see your face. You haven't changed one iota.
You Hollywood people are a problem. You know that?
I know.
Oh, I've said that already a couple of times.
Good. You can't say it enough.
Brucey, what's going on? Right there.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Bruce.
Welcome to the show, Bruce Smirnoff. I owe you a lot. I'm not going to get too much into that, but you were the first guy that I met at the Improv, you and Mark Goldstein. And, if it wasn't for you and your friendship and your kind of guidance, I wouldn't be here today doing podcasts. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, you came in 81.
Yeah.
And that was when Bud had taken on Mark as a partner.
Right.
And then Mark helped turn the Improv around from what it was pre that, with the fire and almost the bankruptcy and everything. And then Evening at the Improv, you guys came in and you really flipped it. And that's when I met you, Bruce. Yeah. And you were roommating with Barry Martyr.
Well, wait, not so fast, because you and I and Billy Rebeck were hanging out at the Improv together, and I was living with my sister. And
you were with the sister first. I didn't remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
And Barry heard me say that I was living with my sister, and he said, well, wait a second, why don't we be roommates? And I said, oh, well, that sounds kind of interesting, because as you know, Barry was writing for everybody in the business, from
Barry was one of the most important writers in Seinfeld's life. Barry has that goofy, Barry writes in pictures. He's one of the few writers who writes visually. And if you notice the genesis of Seinfeld, when Seinfeld started to expand his material and speak in more comic book material, that was all Barry whispering in his ear. Barry's one of the main proponents of getting Seinfeld where he was.
Yeah, if you go back to the original episodes of Seinfeld,
yes,
you will see, I just saw like the first one or two. I thought he just did like 1 2-minute thing in the beginning or the end of the show, but in the first several, it was 4 or 5 of them. They kept going back, and I could hear Barry's humor.
Smart enough to take it verbatim. And he was just, it's almost like listening to a bug in your ear. And he was really good at perfecting that. So the combination of Seinfeld and Barry Martyr, I think, was what got him over the hump and made him the superstar that he is.
The Improv was just such an amazing thing. Rupert, I'd love to hear from you how that all came about, because Bruce will tell you that we've been talking about having a show like the back scene show for the comedians. But how did this show come about?
For me, I think probably the first time I heard about the idea of a television show, it was in 1979, early 1980, when Larry O'Daly, who was a gentleman from New York, who had, I believe there were 6 other O'Daly, and they were all in TV distribution, and they were quintessential New York kind of people, and they couldn't find money, and they met the Larry O'Daly met a man called Gordon Arnold up in Canada, and they worked out some deal that they could get Canadian money into it, which meant that they had to have, certain Canadian things, like we did the online editing in Canada. We used a crew from Canada, in fact, came down in a huge truck. And it was also, it was like one comic in each show was a Canadian, mostly. And that was so that we could get the points to be able to get all the write-offs. So it was money, which basically, broached and I was Canadian, which was, and just happened to, and I had been working with Jonathan Winters doing another series immediately before that. So that's maybe why I got the job. But frankly, with an English person who I'd come to university in America, but I literally discovered all these wonderful people that we managed to get to host the first shows, who had really started out walking the boards and doing the Catskill thing, and were, I was talking to you, Mary, last night. We drew on a great wellspring of existing seasoned talent, and then there were new talent as well. So a lot of the humor was the new meeting the old, and with respect. And Billy Crystal just captured that so well. He knew what kind of a tradition we were plugging into, and it was a trip.
And Billy, of course, having cut his teeth in comedy at the Improv in New York City on, I believe, 44th Street. But Mary, you pulled off quite a comedic coup, because one of the first comics that you brought down from Montreal became quite a star. I mean, from Canada.
You talking about Jim Carrey?
Yes.
Yeah, it was, I believe I found him, I talked to Mark Breslin at Yuck Yucks when, because we needed to have that Canadian content on each show. And so, there was Jim, there was Maurice LaMarche, not a comic, but yeah, Howie. William Shatner was one of the hosts. We had to have music acts, that were from Canadian. It was a lot of kind of research, and this is before computers. So it was a lot of phone calls, but I think Yuck Yucks was very supportive and helpful in this area with the comedians. And Mark Breslin ended up doing the show as well.
So what did you think of Jim Carrey when you first saw him? Because, it's one thing to hear a lot of hoopla about someone. It's another thing to sort of look at someone and say, oh, okay, let's take a look at him.
Well, I think to answer that question, and Mary and I were both involved in it, the time of the Improv, he came on and essentially did impressions, I would say, in a goofy kind of way.
I remember.
And then he went into this, I would say, a sabbatical for about a year or two, and he just worked a whole new persona, and that led practically to his movie career, I would say. But it was at the Improv that the booker from St. Elsewhere happened to be there, and he got into St. Elsewhere.
Oh, I didn't know that's how it happened.
That was Howie's story. Yeah. But Jim was, as I said, he did a whole transformation and came out, was Ace Ventura, was suddenly how it sort of manifested itself. But I don't know if Bruce, if you ever saw him working in that sort of 81, 82 era before he really took off. But
yes,
it was an interesting, Mary and I would go there, and there were about a dozen people in the audience. And it was just, you could see he was just trying to just push a little this way, see what worked. And it was fascinating, actually.
Well, when I saw him do Sammy, I don't think I'll ever forget watching him do Sammy Davis Jr. the first time. It was too much, man.
Wait a minute. Wait, you asked me, Rupert, you asked me about Jim Carrey. Yes, he had come prematurely before Evening at the Improv. Bud Robinson.
Yes.
We all remember Bud, the great manager of Doc Severinsen.
Lovely man.
And great comedians. Bud had heard about him, and Bud sent for him. Now, you got to remember, Jim Carrey is only 19 years old at this point. So it's either, I don't think it's 79, I think it's 80. And Bud called Jim McCauley, the talent coordinator for the Tonight Show. And this was like a big night. I remember everybody was all buzzed about this kid who's taking Canada by storm. And I'm not the doorman, but the host, and I'm sitting in my stool, and a white limousine pulls right up in front of the club. And out comes this skinny kid, Jim, and he's in a white suit, and he's got sunglasses on, but he's accompanied by two very beautiful women on both arms. He made a real spectacle of this. And they were like, he told me they were flight attendants, but they were like 30 years old. And he like walked into the club, like this big picture, went on stage. And I did not watch his show, but I'm sure he was terrific. But the word afterwards from Jim McCauley to Bud Robinson was not for the Tonight Show. Can you imagine? But that's what things are like in the beginning of a comedian's career. And then he started to do these cartoon characters, as you said, Rupert. And then he went into that deep hiding thing that was over at the Comedy Store, where he developed more deeper. And then he emerged as the guy we know today.
Yeah, yeah. It was, I think it was painful. I mean,
May
just
I ask you a question, Rupert?
yes.
Did you take this show to Mitzi first? Did you take the idea to her and she passed on it?
Not to my knowledge, although
Okay.
I had heard that. I mean, I just saw Bud, Bud had developed a relationship with the distributor and the guy in Canada. So it was still pretty soft-boiled, and they were all fairly dynamic characters, and it was it was like a nursery a good deal of the time, because and Mary was in the foreground of that, but we dealt with just mad situations and money not arriving, and I had the classic word for the guy who was the guy at HBO who said, "You're never going to work on this town in this town."
Chris Albrecht.
Chris
Yes,
Albrecht.
Chris Albrecht. He was quite right.
No, he
You know,
wasn't.
I have a Chris Albrecht story, guys. Barry Martyr and I and somebody else, we went to pitch a project. We had Alan Landsberg Productions with us, and we went to pitch a project about, it was that multi-show before they had multi segments of a comedy. And we went in there and pitched. We're all sitting around, and we thought it was a great idea. Barry is very funny. He wrote all this comedy. We're all sitting around, and we pitch him, and Chris goes, "No, I don't think so." So
That's why
imagine
we're wounded souls.
we're all sitting there thinking, all right, we finally made it to the big time. And he went, "No, sorry."
No.
Hey, can I tell a story about one of the characters on your show, Mary and
Okay.
Rupert? So Bruce mentioned Mark Goldstein, right?
Oh, he
Oh.
wonderful man.
Well, look, with the praying, he needs that now.
I bet he's probably got angel wings.
Yes, he has angel wings. So life was not good. Mark was extremely funny on stage, off stage, phenomenal. Could do impressions. If you were in a bad mood, he'd make you happy. But in real life, he kind of squandered every opportunity. He had anger issues, whatever. But he wound up down here in Florida, and he wound up working down here in Florida because of the laws of what's called homestead exemption. A lot of scam operations work down here. So he wound up being like a runner in one of these scam companies located in a small building in Hollywood, California, that was selling like real estate in Costa Rica, but it didn't have any plumbing and it had no electricity. So you'd buy the land and you'd be stuck. It was just anyway, it was all done by telephone and fraud. And he was like the gopher. So one day they send him to Dunkin' Donuts, for the 10 guys in the office. And he goes to Dunkin' Donuts. He gets 24 donuts. So they give it to you in a like a 2-foot box. And he's carrying the box. On top of the box is the bag with the cream and the sugar and the stirs. And he's walking like this. And in the left hand, he's got the jug of coffee, a gallon of coffee. So I guess he's carrying the box with one hand, jug of coffee in the other. He gets to the building where the office is. And there's about 10 steps that he has to negotiate to get into the building. As he's on the second step, the 2 doors to the building come busting open like in a movie, and out come all these FBI agents with the jackets and FBI over it, and all the employees in the office are handcuffed, and they're running them down the stairs into the van to take them away. And they don't know that Goldstein works in the office. They think he's just this poor schmuck who's works in another building in the thing. So the FBI guys hold the door open for Goldstein, and he looks around and he just walks in, and they hauled everybody off to jail.
Oh my God.
And that's
Finally,
Mark. I mean,
finally,
that's the life of Goldstein. Huh?
Did that happen in Hollywood, Florida, or Hollywood,
Hollywood, Florida. Yeah. And then they resurfaced selling fake, whatever. He was like a guy they'd keep around for laughs. And 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 then get him to be one of the guys on the phone. There's if you ever watch movies about these rip-off people, there's the first level that gets you friendly on the phone, then they transfer you to the next guy, whatever. So that's what unfortunately that was one of his jobs. But just a cute story. I just tell it for the Dunkin'
He has
Donuts.
such a good heart,
So there was so many highlights at the Improv. I mean, I remember from when I was new and really, really green, I was standing in a doorway when they were shooting, the people rushing through the doorway, and I saw myself sitting in the audience for the different comedians. I mean, it was such a exciting time. And then to meet people like Phil Silvers and Phyllis Diller.
Phil Silver's wonderful. I remember that very clearly.
Tell me about him, because I don't know anything about him.
For me, once again, I mean, my background is documentary film, so I was fascinated by people like all that age group. We had at least maybe 10 or a dozen of those hosts out of the 50 we did, where all had this same experience of stand up and the Catskills, but Phil Silvers really had one thing he wanted to do, and that was to play his instrument. And so we worked it out. So the last time I think he appeared on television anywhere, he played Stardust on his clarinet. And it was so moving. I mean, he said, "That's my swan song."
Oh.
It was lovely. I mean, he was a lovely man, particularly that. But there were a number of them that you develop, obviously, as we all do, in very short-term relationships, which are incredibly creative and stimulating and exciting.
And Brucey, who were your favorites? Because you were there for it all. I was there, different eyes. You were there for it all.
Are we talking about only when they were filming Evening at the Improv?
Yeah, just for now. Just for now.
General?
Yeah, those were little bursts. We did 13 at a time.
That's right.
So we did 4 kind of stints.
Well, I would say the comics that I idolized were Jackie Mason and Richard Lewis and Robert Klein. Did Robert Klein do the show?
No,
but Richard Lewis.
We didn't have him, Robert Klein, did we?
I don't think we did, but I think I approached him. Maybe he wasn't able to or whatever. I approached him.
So those were the people, but Richard Lewis did the show, correct?
Oh, he was wonderful.
He
and
amazing.
He still is just and
how's he doing? Is he sort of okay?
All the girls had a crush on him.
I would imagine so. I'm not friendly with him. Not that I'm not friendly with him, but he was always at a much higher plane than me. So he became very famous, and I wasn't. So we had different sets of friends, but always nice to me. And I really would learn every time I watched him. I think he's
it was remarkable. I mean, he just invested himself so fully in what he was talking about. He's wonderful.
And he was so sweet. And after the show, he would send a thank you note. And, you don't receive many of those, but, Richard did. And when we had Donovan on the show as a performer, he also sent one to myself and to Rupert.
I remember there was some great musical acts. Tell me about some of other than Donovan, you had some great musical acts.
Wow, Rick Springfield. Here's my picture.
No, as opposed to Bruce Springsteen, who we did not have.
What did you say?
We didn't have Bruce Springsteen, but
no, not that I didn't try. I don't know. My favorites for me was Boomtown Rats.
I was going to say Bob Geldof. That was an amazing show, and that was somewhat just before, in fact, Live Aid, wasn't it? It would have been about 3 years before Live Aid.
Yes. I remember going to the hotel personally to deliver whatever. And because I loved Boomtown Rats, and he answered the door. And so besides, delivering him whatever, I had him sign something for me.
The music was interesting in terms of production, because we did all of stand-up comedy over the course of about a week and a half. So that was where we got that of the 13 shows we did. Then we would change pace, and we would do 3 bands or 4 bands a day over a period of couple of days, maybe 3 days, so that they could get audio and lighting and all that kind of stuff done. But the atmosphere changed very dramatically. I mean, the comics, you know, it was a pretty straightforward, you know, you did contracts and everything was done. They knew they were self-directing. But the minute the music happened, there were the caravans outside with a lot of muttering going on in these caravans. And it became mad for about 2 or 3 days, and not unenjoyable, but to see some of those people was incredible, wasn't it? Spencer Davis. I mean, I think of, once again, I'm portraying my age or our age, that we kind of, even back in 1980, to play 60, you know, like people like John Sebastian. I mean, it was retro then. So now it's practically, you know, in a museum, but
it was challenging because they had to be available during those 3 days because of that. So that's what the difficult part was about booking the music.
So let me see if I understand this right, because it was 40 years ago and I don't remember. Are you saying that you taped 13 episodes of Evening at the Improv over like a 10-day period?
Essentially, I mean, we did the material, because it's all in the editing. I mean, this is what's so interesting about this show. I mean, you always get more than you need. So we were in a position to, you know, to trim, which is an art form. It's an art when you kind of marry connecting a laugh here to another laugh, you know, edited up close to it, and you have to smooth over the edits. So the show was sweetened with the audience, the real audience laughter, both, you know, cheers and boos and claps. All of those were real, but we put them on a sweetening machine, which I'm sure Bruce is familiar with, you know, which you almost play like a piano. And we would kind of ride over the edits, so it was smooth and the laughs didn't sort of stop abruptly. And it was an amazing period. But the music, fun enough, the music at that time, audio was so far behind in the television business that we would just make a quick little mono thing and it went off, you know, and was put on the TV reel and, you know, was broadcast. But
so I just finished reading The Improv, written Bud Friedman's book.
yes.
And it was quite an interesting book. It was actually a great book because I learned so much, mostly about what happened at the New York Improv, because I lived through what happened in the 80s out in Hollywood, as Bruce did.
Yes.
And it was sort of surprising to see how little Bud mentioned the show, because to me, it was the springboard for everything. So what was your relationship like with Bud, who's absolutely acknowledged as, I'm not going to say the granddad of comedy, because, you know, that's not, and he's not doing well health-wise right now, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but tell me about your relationship with Bud, and were you working with Mark as well when you first started the show?
Mark was just happening, I think. And I'm going back to 1980, and sometime in there is when Mark arrived. And Mark told me once his great ambition was to make it so the toilets didn't smell. That was the one thing he wanted to really achieve there. And but Mark was a very nice man and has had some recent successes, I'm glad to see.
Yes.
With he was great. I think he was very good influence on Bud, actually. And but Bud, you know, everyone who's dealt with Bud has, you know, probably had the same experience. I mean, it's all about Bud. But then if it wasn't all about Bud, we probably wouldn't have had the Improv. But I found it's funny. At university, I studied diplomacy. I mean, I got a degree in diplomacy, which probably was the greatest asset in doing the Improv, because one was constantly dealing with, you know, countervailing forces.
So, Bruce, I know you had your I'm thinking you had your first television opportunity with Evening at the Improv.
I did. And the effect of that,
Yes.
I was still trying to find out who I was on stage and all that. And you gave me that great opportunity. And once you had that in the can, and I think my first episode was fairly good, so it was acceptable. It opened the door to all these burgeoning comedy clubs that were opening up all through America. I remember Sacramento was one of the first ones I went to, and San Jose and Pacific Northwest, and they would always bring you on from Evening at the Improv. It was such a big, and I went on stage 4 weeks ago. And these young kids that are the MCs now, they're like, and this guy was on Evening at the Improv. And that's how you have legs on that show, because obviously I guess it's still shown somewhere, but I think it's shown on YouTube, and these kids watch it. And the irony is, when I watch my shows, I cringe because I see mistakes I was making and how I've grown. But to a young person, they just watch things at face value, and they probably love everybody that they see on that show. Everyone is a hero to them. So yeah, you are a milestone, because it was the Tonight Show or it was nothing. And you came along and offered an option. And I mean, there was Showtime. They had a show called Laugh-a-thon, and that might have been 79, but that was a contest kind of a show. Yours was the first, hey, here it is. We're going to feature these guys, give them their own moment on stage. And yeah, you were the first.
And also you guys created a life and a space for me, because as those shows started airing on syndicated television, my roommate Barry was saying, man, why don't you ask these guys if you can book them? I said, no, I don't want to do that. Everybody hates their agent. I don't want to be an agent. And he said, no, listen, you need to put some money in your pocket. You can put money in their pocket. They know you, they liked you, they respect you. Why don't you just ask them?
That's when you had your thing with Howie Mandel. You started booking him.
Exactly.
I believe. And who else? Gallagher?
Murray? No, not Gallagher. Murray?
Sure.
Murray Langston, the unknown comic.
Unknown comic. How's he do it?
We, Bruce, Barry, the unknown comic Murray Langston took Barry as his opening act out to Dallas. And when people say to me, what was your most fun ever? I'd say Barry invited me along, and the three of us went out to Dallas, to the Dallas Comedy Club. Right. Well, when I tell you, from the time we got into the plane with the stewardesses, from the time we got to every restaurant and then went on stage, this guy, Murray Langston, is just plain out funny, and all he wants to do is make people laugh. And we just had, imagine a whole weekend of laughing and being, the stars, and why hundreds of people were coming to see a show. What an experience that was.
Well, it was brilliant marking. I would say Mark and Bud, basically the first lot were done at the beginning of the 80s, and then they managed to get a deal with A&E, which gave the whole real life to that. And they realized they had a brand. And so that was how it was just sort of disseminated. And the same director, Ron Cantor, who we should all mention, is responsible for so much of the feeling of that show initially. But he worked on, they were half hours, and so they were more straight ahead. We didn't have music. We didn't have comedy sketches. They were done, and I was not involved in that point. I was working at NBC, so it was wonderful to see it continue on. And as you read that, you read some of these books that about the history of comedy. There were so many new venues were opening up during the 80s. It became the alternative to sort of ballroom dancing or something.
You talk about the luck and serendipity. Again, I started there in 79 as just the host. I don't believe I was good enough to get on, but I would MC, and I used to host the audition nights, and that gave me a good platform. But I got to be the eyes and ears about what you were saying about Bud and Mark. Bud, this was before Mark. Bud was about to lose the club. I was there. There was some kind of strike in early 80s. It was either actors or writers, and we decided to come up with
Writer's strike.
Writer's strike. So Bud came up with the idea, let's have a soup kitchen. So to garner publicity. And so I had to supervise it. And they, with the kitchen, they were serving soup. Nobody showed up, but it was a publicity event. And I remember this guy from the liquor company came to give a delivery, and he comes up to me and he's shaking the pink slip. You better pay. You better pay. You're never going to get liquor again. And I'm like, sir, I'm the host here. I'm an aspiring comedian. That's not in my bit, but I'll make sure I give that to him. You give it to him. So basically he was close to the shuttering. And then I remember him meeting very seriously with Mark over a period of time. And then Mark came in, like you said.
Mark Linnell, we should say. Some people might think
Mark
we're talking
Lano,
about
yeah.
Mark Goldstein, but no,
Oh,
Mark
I'm
Linnell.
sorry. Yes, Mark Lano. And he instilled this goodwill. He was giving out Hershey's Kisses to people. Like you said, the bathroom, he figured out a way so the bathrooms wouldn't smell. And he turned it around in a very short period of time. And then, as we say, serendipity, you guys came involved. People started hanging around. Also, it became like the biggest Coke den in Hollywood.
That's
and
why
I had no
so
idea about that. I'm a very innocent kid at the time, and I only read about this I believe it's in the book Wired, and you would see all these famous people every night there. I'm going, geez, why are these people hanging out? And it turns out, do you want to hear this story, or is this off the track for me?
I don't know.
So if you remember, there were 4 tables in the restaurant area of the Improv. And by the way, the restaurant was originally run, when I got in, by Donovan's ex-wife, and her name was Enid, and she ran the restaurant. And she had a nice son who was about 14 years old. The Improv then suffered a fire in 1979. And then when they finally got the insurance money to rebuild it, Enid's son brought these 2 kids from Fairfax High School to paint. We needed to paint, and we needed to hire people really cheap. So they hired Enid's son and these 2 guys. And one of them was Karen. Remember the waitress from Australia, Karen Balzery? So one of them was her brother. They were very nice boys, and they did a good job. And it turns out her brother is a guy named Flea, who's in a band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And the other guy who painted was the leader of the group. Now we go to the 80s, and you start seeing these stars. And there were 4 tables in the restaurant part of the Improv. 1 table was for Bud, and the other 3
the round table.
Correct. And the other 3 tables were these men who were very nice men to me. Remember, I'm a very naive guy. I just want to be a comedian. So each one, I would ask one, I would say, X, what do you do for a living? And X said, I'm a movie producer. Hey, that's good enough for me. X sat there. Y, I used to say to Y, what do you do? I own a jewelry store. Oh, that's wonderful. Everybody needs jewelry. And he sat at that table. And the other guy, call him Mr. P. I said, Mr. P, what do you do? He goes, I'm a nurse. I go, well, the world needs more nurses. It's a beautiful thing you're doing. Meanwhile, these guys were the biggest Coke dealers in Hollywood. And I had no idea. But everyone would come to their table, and there'd be a handshake and a thing, or go into the bathroom, come back.
Oh, what did we miss?
If you read, I know. This is why all these big stars. John Belushi was there the night that he passed away. He came and got, all these people were there. And they're not, many of them are not with us anymore, unfortunately. But yes, and those were wacky times. And yeah, just giving you a footnote.
So, but yeah. I don't want to go too far past something that Bruce brought up about 5 minutes ago. He said he performed about a month or so ago, and I was there. And I want to tell you, I want everybody to know this. He was there with some incredible acts. Don Gavin, godfather of Boston comedy. He was there with Jimmy Schubert.
Awesome.
He was
Phenomenal.
there with Richmond Ravini, just to
Incredible.
name a few. And you see this guy right here? He killed. I never heard him funnier in my whole life. And I've been around Bruce more than any comic other than my roommate, Barry Martyr. And we've worked lines and we've worked together, sat together, had fun together. Bruce, you were amazing. I was
thanks.
so
Yeah,
happy.
I'm not in the business anymore. That's why I'm so funny. I personally don't care anymore. So I guess when you have that attitude, it's reflective when you get on stage. But yeah, listen, I've been doing this I started in 1975. So we'll do the math. I think that's 46 years. So yeah, and again, thank you to my friends Mary and Rupert, because that got me. That was that first thing that got me some credibility and helped me a great deal. But we shouldn't be just sitting here kissing on each other. Let's get down to real good stories. Go back to your hosting, Bruce.
Okay, so let's get back to kissing Mary's butt. So Mary,
You were very popular, Mary. Everybody liked you.
Everybody loved Mary.
She should write her memoirs.
Everybody loved Mary. And
It was either Jim McCauley, and Jim McCauley, when he was sober, wasn't a nice guy. And when he was a drunk, he was worse. So that was the key. That was the key to Johnny Carson. And at the time, there was no Letterman yet. There was nothing. So it was Mary Downey, this nice down-to-earth girl from Boston, and what a pleasure to deal with her than the other
Bruce, you're so
higher-ups.
sweet.
tell us a little bit more about some of your memories, Mary. About
What are my memories? I remember.
Well, remember your dad. That's where you started.
Yes, my dad was a politician in Boston, and so I worked in politics before I came to LA, and then I worked at ICM, and from ICM, I couldn't be a secretary anymore, and I got a job in production, and I worked like the Bee Gees' first TV special and Battle on Network Stars, and then I don't know how I got to Rupert for Evening at the Improv.
I think it was through Fred Fuchs, who was associate producer.
And Fred became very successful too. I'm trying to think. I remember the Andy Kaufman show.
Oh,
I think he had at the time, he had that bump.
he had the cyst on his neck.
Yes, and the opening of the show was he wanted people to touch it. And but I also remember for the opening too, he wanted to do.
The bunny hop.
Huh?
The bunny hop.
The bunny hop down out of the club, out of the back door of the club and around the
All the way
club.
around, down the alley, around back. Yeah.
Yeah, and then inside. That was the show opening for him.
So Bruce, I didn't get him the way some of the other comedians got him. I mean, people call him brilliant, and of course, he has he has a comic mind. But some of those things he did, the cereal for 5 minutes, reading a book for 5. I mean, he really pushed it with me, and I was in the audience for many of those crazy things that he did. So what did you think, Bruce, as a comedian? What did the guys think? We used to all sit in the back of the room and watch. What did you guys think?
What's the word? All I can say is if you watch his first appearance on the Tonight Show and how he does Elvis, that if you watch that first, it kind of gives an excuse to all the pranks and everything that he did, because he really was an amazing talent. But he took it to a level where everything was the stage. Waking up in the morning, if the mailman, he would put on the mailman, he put everybody on, and that was part of his comedy. But when you're putting on somebody in real life, they don't know it, it seems very strange. That's why you would have observed that. I used to watch all that. There was the time you talk about the cereal where he came, people knew he was going to be at the club, went on stage, and it all all was for 20 minutes. He sat in a chair, a table with a menu, and he ordered, the waitress kept coming up, and he basically for 25 minutes ordered off the menu, ordered a strawberry sundae, ate the strawberry sundae, paid for it, and left. And this was all like a table and 2 chairs on stage, as if he was in a restaurant. Did not acknowledge the audience. It wasn't funny, and it was real time. It wasn't like he ate really quickly. He just 25 minutes to eat an ice cream sundae, and people were infuriated and they were walking out. And then a quarter of the audience thought it was the greatest thing they ever had. So I think does that explain it to you? People liked to be had or be put on, or to feel that they were higher and enjoying this high level of supercharged comedy that most people wouldn't get. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask each and every one of you, who was your favorite comic? Who was your favorite host? Mary, let's start with you. Or Rupert, let's start with you.
Rupert, I have to think about
Well,
it.
I suppose I have to be partisan, because in the second season, the second year we did it, my dad, who was,
Yes.
John Steed in the Avengers and all that, he came on, and that was just a beautiful experience for a son and father, and it was great. And but the real star was Arnie Kogan and the writers. He knew how to catch people's voices, so he worked with the hosts a lot and was a wonderful writer. And but I suppose that was. But I think that occasionally when a show really everything worked together, and there were a few of them, it was like they'd all been chosen to be in the same show, because they complemented it. We really thought long and hard about the chemistry of it. So it was interesting to have that many, 200 performances essentially, which we then made look like it was happening in real time at the Improv. And it was sometimes it would work well, sometimes, and it wasn't just the jokes, it was the feeling. And the sketches I think we did were gave it a certain life, and they didn't always work. In fact, they very often didn't, but they gave it a life. And it was
Mark Goldstein did his best in those.
Mark was wonderful. He very often they made it real, and it was I wish we had been able to take that further, but we didn't.
Hey, Mary, who are some of your favorite, what sticks out for you? Some of the comics that just like, wow.
It's so hard to pick, just one or two or whatever. I just remember I was a big fan of Paul Reiser at the time.
Yes.
I love Paul. I still do. He was adorable. He was one of those that came from New York that we had on the show. And also Jerry Seinfeld, of course, he was
4
great
times.
Right from the beginning, he was a funny guy. Stephen Wright. We did a thing where we wanted to get some Boston comics because the scene was getting really big in Boston. And he had sent me a audio tape, just an audio from one of the clubs in Boston. And it was hysterical. And that's how I booked him. He was, and then he just, escalated. Who else? Howie. Let's see. I don't know. Everybody did a great job. Michael Keaton.
Tony Curtis was pretty.
Oh, I won't tell you my Tony Curtis story, but I love Tony Curtis. It was so exciting to meet him with that accent and that voice. And, he was happy to do the show. Milton Berle. They were all, it was a great time. ICM and William Morris were very supportive of the show. The agent Aaron Cohen, I don't know if you remember him. Aaron, he brought many comedians to the show. ICM did. Irvin Arthur. Do you remember him, Bruce?
Oh yeah, sure. I used to work. Nice. Bruce Smirnoff. Well, Bruce and I know Irvin Arthur pretty well.
Do you remember Eric Gold?
Sure.
Yeah, I often wonder what happened to Eric because we became really good friends. Larry David, he was always kind of bizarre on the show, you know.
Had more hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had kind of that bozo look then.
Hey, Brucey, who did you really like? Who stood out for you?
I was working the door, so I don't really remember watching the show. But you mentioned Tony Curtis. May I deviate and just give a minor Tony Curtis story or not?
Oh,
Sure,
please.
sure.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So I was picked to warm up a show, HBO, I think it was called The Great Magicians, and they had him as the host. And all I had to do was warm him up at the beginning, but I got to hang around. And Tony Curtis, they gave him his own bus with a dressing room and everything. And I'm walking by the bus and the door opens up and he goes, "Hey kid, can you get me a match?" I went, "Certainly." And I got him a book of matches and I went into the bus and I handed it to him. He goes, "Sit down." And you got to remember Tony Curtis, just for some people watching this, he's, big movie star and Jewish guy from the Bronx, New York. And my mother and my mother's ilk would drop dead over Tony Curtis because this is a local boy done good and so handsome and such a great actor. Anyway, give him the matches and it's for a joint that he's lighting up. So I'm just sitting there and I can't believe Tony Curtis is smoking a joint. And then he hands me the joint. And I'm not a big smoker. Okay. And I took a puff of marijuana and I gave it back to him. And all I could think of, I gotta call my mother and tell her that I'm smoking pot with Tony Curtis. And so it was such a great break to be warming up that show. It was a great break to be working and a great break, obviously, to meet Tony Curtis. But the whole kick of it was to tell my mother that I took a puff of pot with Tony Curtis. And and I couldn't wait. And in those days, there wasn't, you had to wait till you went home. You had to wait till after 5 for the rates to go down.
Right.
Oh,
Hey,
my
Brucey,
God.
Brucey, you and I were there when Johnny came in and put himself by the bar.
Yeah, that's another story that I don't want to necessarily tell that here because that's a 20-minute story and we're not here for that. That's going to steal away from everything we've talked about. But yes, he never had been to the Improv before and he was there. I think he went to Dangerfields one time in New York City, but he was not a guy for going out to clubs. But he was there.
Rupert mentioned he was there because Ed McMahon, that was the show that Ed McMahon hosted.
He was in the audience for Ed's show.
Oh.
And,
then that would have been 2 times then. Okay.
Yeah. Well, because all of both, I mean, Ed and what's his name? Music.
Doc Severinsen.
Senior moment. They both did the show. And so I did approach him and he was very polite, but said it was not for him. And but he was enjoying the show. And I had got a close up of him clapping enthusiastically, which we probably put in about 4 or 5 different shows just to sort of sprinkle him around.
One of the great opportunities, the first year or so that the show was on, it was just in syndication. Now that would be great, except it meant that it's a lot harder to find an audience because it could be on at 11:30 at night in one place and 12:30 at night in another, 3 in the afternoon someplace else, and it would get moved around. And so, that first year or so, it really didn't find the audience that it eventually did. You mentioned, Rupert, back a while ago that something pretty terrific happened where it went into A&E took it and really started playing it consistently all over. I don't know if it was all over the world, but certainly all over the country.
A&E wanted to have 50 shows available, and they played the full hour. But so that, I suppose, was suddenly the infusion that they wanted, because they got 2 runs out of, and I suspect the finances of going to A&E, and I was not involved at all at that point. But Bruce, from your point of view, did you, or both of your point of view, is, I mean, they were signed for a performance and also a repeat, was what they got in their contract. But I think I gather, and only very recently, that there was quite a lot of pushback that they didn't get anything out of the comics didn't get anything out of the A&E showing, which seems to be they should have done. I mean, I think at that point, the property became very strange. I mean, I was left owing a year's salary at the end of the experience because they just ran out of money. So I ended up financing the post-production for a lot of the end of it, and all of which was, under the, it's disappeared now, but those are infuriating things that happen, and slowed it down. And so it was a lot of people were trying to, make as much money as they could and get out, and that was often the way. And but on the other hand, for me personally, it was a privilege and a great joy to do it. My only regret is that I could never get Jonathan Winters to appear on the first 50 shows, and I don't know why, but he was such a wonderful man, and having worked with him before, I really felt it was a little incomplete. And also Jay, I felt Jay should have been a host way back in '82, but the distributor said, "Oh, I never heard of him," kind of thing. And but I at one point was trying to get Jay involved, but that did not happen either. Jay was the first person I saw in 1978, long before I'd ever heard of the TV show. And I went to the Improv, and it was Jay. He arrived with his motorbike, parked it right there, came in, did a show, and it was just terrific to watch.
I remember that like it happened yesterday.
Yeah.
And Mary, of course, having come from Boston, I don't remember if you said you were even aware of Jay back then or not, but Jay has one of the most interesting and challenging pathways to becoming successful in comedy. I mean, he worked every place. There were no comedy clubs when he started. He worked every restaurant, every strip club. And in the book that I read with, the Improv, it said that he would drive down to New York, a 4-hour drive for the weekend, just to get on stage at the Improv, and then drive back up to Boston. He was a determined guy.
The success of the Improv has really contributed to Rupert, his vision, his creativity, his wanting to bring the feel of the comedy club into television, and with Ron Cantor. I thank you so much, Rupert, for the opportunity to work on the show and be a part of it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That means a lot.
To me, it was one of the great shows. I'm sure you could see it either on Prime or Netflix. All you have to do is look for it.
And there's also cassettes of it, but it's not the same as having the feeling of the show. But they have a sort of package and everything, which is still available.
You know what's interesting, when I watch some of the episodes, the stars are nervous because they're used to scripts, they're used to rehearsal, they're used to the thing, and now some of them, you see them, they're up in their head while they're on the camera, because they're going, I don't think I'm being funny, and this is funny, but wait a minute, they hired me just because of who I am. And it's when you look back at some, you see them thinking and wondering whether they're funny or not, and they didn't have to be. You just wanted them for who they were.
One really learned about their work methods, though. I mean, I'm just thinking of Mr. Showbiz himself. The hardest rehearsal I'd ever seen. I mean, they really worked hard. The good one, Leslie Nielsen. I mean, he really brought something to the whole experience, and it was nice. I mean, it must have been very odd to go into that little room and say, we're going to make magic, but we did.
How was Charles Grodin, Rupert?
He was a little doer, but he was like a big movie star. I mean, everyone knew Charles Grodin then. I mean, relatively speaking, most of the people I think have been probably not instantly first of mind.
I mean, when he arrived, I was telling him, "Oh, I'm just such a huge fan. I love you. I love your movies. I love you on Saturday Night Live." And he looked at me with that straight face and said, "Why?" I didn't even know what to say. Why?
Good question.
Is there anything else that each of you would like to say? Mary, you put it beautifully. Lots of gratitude, lots of thanks. I have incredible appreciation for the show. It created everything that I became when I became a personal appearance agent for the stand-up comedians. Bruce, of course, was one. And I eventually represented 35 comedians. And it was all because of your show that started airing and all the comedy clubs exploding all over the country in Canada.
Yeah.
And they wanted improv comedians. And, here I was, just like Bruce said, he was a, naive comedian at first. And I was a green guy from Boston. And my roommate said, go talk to everybody. And I did. And because they liked me and they didn't want to make the calls and their agents didn't want to make the calls for them because they were trying to get them sitcoms and movies. Everybody just said yes. And I didn't get work for everybody, but it created an incredible situation for me that's brought me here and sort of still going in the entertainment industry. So, Rupert, I really appreciate what you've done. And Mary, I appreciate you.
We were like a family. And because of that, Rupert brought that atmosphere to the office and to the show. And we all knew something fun was happening. And we just had such a good time doing it. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
It only took a year to get the three of you on my show. So I'm going to give myself a little, I kept with it no matter what.
Well, we'll do it again. It's great to see you, Bruce, again. You look exactly the same.
I know.
It's a miracle.
I appreciate that.
Both Bruces look the same.
He must have been eating right. Anyway.
Rupert, I do want to do another show with you because when you brought up Jonathan, I mean, every once in a while when I do a show and they bring up somebody like Larry David or somebody that Robin, somebody that they knew intimately, I like spending time with that person and just saying, if you don't mind, let's talk more about him, because as much as people think they know that comedian, they don't. And so I would love to do another show with you about the people you've worked with.
You can't analyze comedy. You can't say, and you can't really say what's funny. That's what's so weird. We don't know. That's what's magical.
And Bruce, thank you for doing the show with me. I appreciate it. I'm going to say to you, I hope we get to do another show together.
Great company being with all of you.
Oh,
we all look good. Life's been good to us.
Well, again, thank you guys for doing this show. I know we can go on for hours and hours, and it just feels like we've just kind of skimmed the surface on all the memories that we could share because the show went on for so long. Mary, how long did you work the show? How many years?
I worked 81 and 82, and then the show came back, I believe, 87. And I booked the whole show, but I left before taping.
And Rupert? I was involved from 1980 till 82, 83, really. Because we all thought there was going to be a third season, and I went a lot. I spent a lot of early 83 trying to pull money together and everything, but it was dead and gone. And I went on to other things. I mean, as with all of these things, everything we do informs the thing you do next, and so it was a great moment. I wouldn't have wanted to go on just doing it all the time, but it was for an English person to be in that environment. I learned more than I learned at university, really.
And if you see my sign here that says Golden Age of Comedy, and I know people will say the 50s had some golden age and the 60s and 70s, but for stand-up comedians, and the improv was the golden age of comedy, no doubt about it.
We're still friends. We're still friends. Bruce and I are friends. Most of all the comedians I did booked on the show, we're all still friends. It was
you are. Well, you're amazing. You inherited a lot from your dad, I think.
Oh, no comment, Rupert.
So a great experience. Thank you all for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Brucey, Mary, Rupert, what a wonderful experience. And, you know, I might just come knocking on your door to do another show, you guys, for the
Please
Improv
do.
in the future. I think it would be great. But thank you. God bless you all. I appreciate it. Thank everybody for watching the 80s Golden Age of Comedy. What a fantastic show with these three terrific people. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bruce.
Now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Hey, gang. I've been told by a lot of the comedians I knew and represented during the 80s, I look the same as I did 40 years ago. And come to think of it, I still have my thick brown hair and just a few wrinkles. But most importantly for me, by simply applying the completely safe human growth hormone homeopathic gel on my skin just 2 times a day, the depression and panic attacks I suffered from years ago were gone in just 2 weeks. And then I started deep sleeping for many hours at night. You know, you can have the gel work for you too. To find out more, contact me at bruce@brucestarproductions.com.